The views and opinions expressed in these historical letters that may contain vernacular used in the World War II era, the post-war era, and the Cold War era do not reflect the views and opinions of any of the individuals involved with this project, including, but not limited to, the podcast's creators. Morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Allison.
How are you this morning?
I'm great because when this episode airs, Christmas will be done.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be getting ready to go into the new year. That's a really nice time of year.
It is a really nice time of year, though. I'm going to be on the opposite side of Christmas will be done because there are 12 days of it. So I think we're in the midst of it. It's just, because the Kings aren't there yet.
No,
you can't rush them. They're traveling across the desert following a star. Everybody that's got, I think we were talking about it before, they've got the nativity scene out front, right? And the King's already there, especially when it's before Christmas and the baby's already there. I'm like, spoiler alert. It's not there yet. So we should take our time. We're still within the 12 days of Christmas. But
I never thought of that. No. Every nativity scene I go past would be like, it's not there yet.
Well, we hope everybody that's observing the holiday is having a good Christmas, safe, hopefully fun. We know it can be tough for some people on Christmas, but hey, today we're here to bring you letters from the 40s, to bring you Sweetie.
Sit back and read some letters with us. Like, what's our first letter today, Allison?
First letter today. So we have 3 letters today. Our first letter is from Sweetie. We're going into 1945. Can you believe it? We're already in 1945.
I can't believe it.
So January 6th, we're going to start the new year here with Sweetie. We're going to catch up with what's going on. Now, in the last episode, we learned that Sweetie had to go to Philadelphia with Lew because Lew's dad was sick. So we don't know what's happened there. We knew from the last thing that there was a little card sent by Samuel Graham to Jean saying he was doing better, that Lew and Sweetie were there. But this is the continuation of that to find out what's happening, since they went from an emergency trip, basically, from Hutchinson, Kansas, out to Philadelphia. All right, and we'll start with that letter. Hutchinson, Kansas, January 6th, 1945. Dear Jean, I guess to write a pretty decent letter, I'll have to begin way back at the beginning. Before I start, though, thanks so much for your notes and letters that have kept coming in spite of my laxity. I promise this one will be long enough to partially make amends. Another thing, I'd like a description of the black dress you bought for Daddy to give to Mama as a Christmas present. I'm going to tat a collar for it, if I can. I know a collar isn't quite suitable as an anniversary gift, but I guess I could get it done by then, and maybe she wouldn't object so much. This is quite important if I'm to get it done, so don't forget to write about it. Okay, before we move on, we can see immediately from the address from which she's sending the letter that resolves that question. They are back in Kansas at this point. So at some point between Christmas and January 6th, Lew and Sweetie return to Hutchinson, and they go back to their apartment. Now, settle back and get comfortable, for I'll write a travelogue in detail, beginning now. You did very well by the folks at the plant. Whereas, where did they find a nice purse and sheer hose? And I'm also going to pause here. I think it's important. Yeah. We don't get the travelogue. I think there must have been an appended page or number of pages that detailed the Philadelphia trip, but it's not as with part of this letter, and I have yet to come across it. So it's too bad we don't get to hear the replay of the drama in Philadelphia, but she moves on then and continues the story.
I think it's something very funny to point out. She said you did very well by the folks. Where did they find a nice purse and sheer hose? And I think we can recall Laura's letter to Jean that said, just buy yourself your own Christmas presents. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So I think that Jean went out and got herself a nice purse and some hose from her parents.
Yeah, and we also got on the previous page, because she's tatting the necklace. For the people that missed a previous episode, we were talking about tatting and might not know what that is. It's really a specialty type of needlework that creates things like the lacework on doilies and things. So if you think about a collar being created, and she would learn to do this and would do that. On the previous page here, Chester
clearly gave money to Gene to find something for Laura. So Gene's also taking care of some of his shopping as well.
We did not get a Christmas card from Bob's family, let alone pictures. Guess that shows I'm the stepsister where they're concerned. Bob sent us some stamps via Florence, and she didn't even send those on to us. We had a letter from Frank, too. I hope you can enjoy a trip to Iowa City and giggle with Marion. I just wish you were coming here instead. You'll probably let your feeling of family duty keep you close to the kids, M.A. and Chris. I only hope it is appreciated if you do. I hope this round-robin letter doesn't displease you, but look at the volume I've written and feel sorry for me. Lew's daddy was appreciative of your card to the point of a tear or two. Rest assured that we appreciated your kindness and thoughtfulness to him as they do too. We do love you, Jean, even though we don't often express it in words. Love, Charles and Agatha. Please hurry this on so the folks won't be displeased.
I'm so sad that we didn't get that travel log.
We don't have that voluminous thing that she's talking about, but who knows, maybe one day that will turn up mixed in with everything else.
Well, with the way that you've been finding things,
yeah,
I actually have a lot of faith that we might find something.
I could see it being something that, because a lot, the way the letters were stored, and this doesn't happen frequently, but the way the letters were stored across all of the years, and for our audience that hasn't heard just like how much volume of letters that there are out there were about 3,000 letters from the 40s to the 90s. Most of them are very organized, but I could see a travelogue or something like that being something that Jean would take out later in life to review for like funny moments and things and move it somewhere else, where a lot of them would be very chronological and be like, okay, here's all the ones from the 40s and they're in order. I could see something that's like a distinct addition to something that just has, has its own narrative and thing, being something that would be put aside and maybe read and maybe just didn't get back with everything else. The vast majority of Jean was very organized. So like the bags that were put together, most of the information was together. And that's the thing. Sometimes there's a letter that's not dated. Like I was looking at a letter. I showed it to Jamie when she visited. I said, here's a Chester letter that's not dated. We know how long it could possibly go to, but we have to read the context into what's going on to kind of identify. And the context wasn't clicking it. It still hasn't. So I'm like, I don't think it's happened yet. This letter has yet to be written, because everything that's being talked about, there's no connection to something going on. So sometimes it just takes time to figure out where the letters are from. Thankfully, the vast majority of letters are dated and are together. So it could be that we come across this. I would hope it'd be fun to come across that later. But for our listeners who are like, are we going to get like this surprise letter? It's not going to happen frequently, but every now and then something could pop in and we might refer back to something as we come across it in the collection. Anyway, we go into, I think we could say one of our favorite characters here, the person we were just talking about. Dr. Demaree is back and talking about what's going on in Lacona.
Chester. Okay, so this is a letter from the good doctor to Frank.
Yep. To Frank, yep. Mm-hmm.
To Francois.
Yeah, not Ja Bill, not Ja Lou. Bob is still Bob.
Bob is Bob.
Bob is Bob. But to Francois, he is going to write to his son, who is serving overseas at this point.
Lieutenant Frank E. Demaree, San Francisco, California. January 10th, 1945, Lacona, Iowa. Dear Francois, your letter written December 29th came this morning, having been in voyage for 11 days. I suppose 10 or 11 days will be the average time a letter will require, especially for airmail. I would like for you to tell us how many days this letter requires for its delivery. We are interested in your statement that you are beginning to get used to the air attacks on your area. I wonder how much one has to experience to become accustomed to any kind of attack. And I feel that it would take me quite a while to become accustomed or indifferent to any real danger. I think that as long as the bombs drop fairly out of range, I could stand that. But danger has always been danger to me, and I think that it would be hard for me to change my attitude on the subject. However, that doesn't always make a good soldier.
Yeah.
This is incredibly disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I understand, and I think that any veterans that would be listening, or anybody who is, familiar with that, it's so disheartening to hear that they were in a place and then that bombs was just a part of the daily life so much that they just became used to it.
Right. And I think it's really for any era of service. There's that indifference that, I think back through all of the eras to do what they're able to do and just, I guess, find a way to compartmentalize or put aside, as he says, that indifference to do the job that's in front of them, indifferent to things. Well, I'm thankful I've never had to experience that. And I'm so much grateful to the veterans that do what they do.
Yeah.
And I like how Chester puts this here, where he's thinking, he's like, I don't think I could do that, to have that indifference to what's going on. And his son has it, right? And Bob has it. And Lew has it too. Lew signed up as well. Everybody that signed up to serve. Now, Lew has been domestic the whole time. We don't know yet if he goes abroad, but Bob certainly has been. He's been up in the air, flying planes around. Frank is clearly in this situation. And so, yeah, it brings us back to the reality that this war is very, very active in 45.
We are in the dead of winter, a time of the year when my enthusiasm for the season is lowest, and hopes and anticipation greatest for things to come. I have always anticipated the coming of spring and all that comes with it. It is a pity we cannot trade some of this winter for some of your summer. We are no doubt in for it for about 6 or 8 weeks more. This morning the thermometer was around 6 below, and I took the Chevy and started off. When about a mile out of town, I found out the radiator was frozen up. The overflow tank hose blew off, and the upper part of my cooling fluid drained off, and I had to stop along the road to fill up with water. I wonder how a fella feels going for about several years without having a winter.
I definitely can sympathize with Chester. This time of year, like, well, in January 10th, the New Year's here, and you're anticipating spring. As a gardener, if we have any other listeners who are gardeners, as we know that Chester really admires this and, that profession, the agricolae.
Yeah.
That's the greatest word ever.
Agricolae.
This is the time of year when all of the gardeners are like, time to buy seeds, time to plant the garden, time to get things
everything
started.
Yeah.
You have to stop me from starting my pepper plants. I'm like, January, I think it's a good time to start tomatoes and peppers.
My dad starts it with the tomatoes, the starter plants on the inside and the little thing. Yeah, he starts doing that. He says we're no doubt in for it for 6 or 8 weeks more. And I just kept thinking about the groundhog. Like, I wonder what the groundhog said. That you're closer to Punxsutawney. Yeah, Phil, the groundhog, says 6 to 8 more weeks. So sorry, Chester, I guess the groundhog saw his shadow, and that's what causes that. And then I wonder how a fellow feels going for several years without having a winter. Hey, anybody in California or Florida? Right. Comments here. Chester's wondering how that feels. You might say you have a winter every now and then, but I don't know if it's 6 below. So pretty chilly in Iowa.
As you have been informed, Bob came home December 14th and stayed until nearly the evening of Christmas Day. He came home on a plane transport from Casablanca. He is now in New York and has rented an apartment, and I think that Florence will go and stay with him. She leaves January 23rd, I think it is. I have not heard what his duties are in New York.
All right, I'm going to tease something here for upcoming, very close in the future episodes here. Everybody, if you're following this podcast every week, keep in mind what he's saying here. Bob is stateside. Florence has now followed Bob. That means she's got the little baby, right? Florence is following Bob, just like Sweetie's following Lew, and they're in New York. So if you're trying to keep like a geographic map of where the family members are, from this point on, at least for this part of the story, just keep a little reminder in your mind that Bob and Florence are in New York, because that's going to come up again.
We had a very good Christmas day at Lizzie's. All were present but you and Sweetie, who had to go with Lewis to Philadelphia to make an emergency visit to his father's bedside. They are home now in Kansas. I was not able to give the little chair to K.M. nor the steam engine model to Chris, as I had not have them finished. I have made great progress with both and am measurably satisfied with both of them. I thought for a while that the little chair would be somewhat of a failure on account of the natural difficulties of boring the mortise holes in the round posts. However, after a near failure, and after spoiling two of the short front ones, I decided to make semi-square ones out of round ones, and then could bore the holes without difficulty. I think that I'll have to send you some pictures of these projects so you can see what I've done.
Chester, finish the project. Make your wife some chairs.
He's never, ever, I highly doubt that he ever makes those chairs. But he's very proud of the work that he has done.
He's figured it out. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
While Bob was here, I took him out to see a prospective piece of land that I have had on my mind for some time. I will not call this a 160-acre farm, but will name it a rundown farm. I would like it very much as a place to go and putter around as I please. I think that it can be had for $1,800. It has a real forest on it. There's a thick overgrowth of bushes, vines, trees, and I would like to obtain it and set out several thousand trees of all descriptions, as well as plants, flowers, and fruit trees. I would fence it in good and have it as a sort of resort. I think that it would be possible to add more acreage to it and make an estate out of it. How would you like the idea? Do you think that it could be kept in the family intact for several hundred years? I'm afraid that it could not be done. I think that I could get my money's worth out of it by puttering around. It has one large field, about 70 acres, and the rest is woods, and something like 80 acres in one part, and 8 or 10 in smaller woods. I'm going to make a trial and see if it may be procured. There is another man who has been trying to get it, and I'm afraid that someone has told his boy and makes the man more active bidder against me. There's a fairly good landing field where a plane could be landed, and one living miles away could visit it as well as one living 10 or 15 miles away and traveling by car. What do you think of the proposition?
Oh, Chester. So Chester wants to buy a place so that he can do his puttering.
Yep, he needs a place to putter around.
He needs a place to putter, and I'm sure that Laura's all for this.
Yes. Go putter over there. So, like, I can see her saying that. Go, it's fine. Think about materials or taking pictures of spiders or whatever you're going to do out there.
Taking pictures of spiders. You and Jeff all trapsing around on your 160 acres doing your puttering.
Yeah, if you get any more pes humani, leave it out there, not by the house in the shed. So
I do like, though, I think Chester's a realist. When I was reading through this and he was saying, he's like, could we keep this? This could be the family estate. And then he's like, no, it will not. I will putter and it will be good. Yeah. And he's like, he's like, I'm afraid that could not be done. But I mean, he's got some beautiful ideas. I'm actually, I'm not giving anything away because I don't know if he gets it, but I'm cheering for him.
Yeah, that he outbids this other person that might show an interest. I think it's funny that he mentions like, oh, there could be a landing strip here for a plane, because he says specifically in this letter that Bob went out with him, and Bob's a pilot. Yeah. So Bob doing all this flying, is Bob thinking like eventually after the war he's going to go into flying more, and it would be ideal that he had this landing strip near home no matter where he was located. But this idea of the family estate, staying with the family for the several hundred years, it was always very interesting to me from my mother's side of the family that my grandmother, not Sweetie, my maternal grandmother, she was up in Dauphin County, up by Harrisburg, in a little town, and she was always really sad that the family kind of dispersed from the area, because for generations they stayed in like central Pennsylvania. The family stayed. And this tends to be something in the 20th century. It seems to me that the people born about the 1920s and 1930s are really the last generation of people to stay in the family estate. And in Sweetie's case, her family's born 1910, 1920. She's born in 22. Jean's born in 1920. They're even moving out at this point, right? We know Sweetie's got this connection to Pennsylvania. Something's probably going to happen there. We know that Florence is in Kansas. So we start to see that dispersal of people. On my mother's side of the family, this didn't really happen at all until her generation. So by like the 50s, 60s, people are going to other parts of the country. And today I have cousins all over the country. And there is sort of a sadness there. You can see it from Chester. He wants to like have the homeland and like this is the estate. Yeah. His immediate like parents and ancestors are from the Indiana side of things. And they were there for a few generations. And before that they were in Kentucky for a couple. And before that they were in Pennsylvania, New Jersey for like 2 to 3 generations. So there's always like some probably about 50, 60, 70 years that people are staying together. But by the 20th century, and we can see it today, how much do we have family members that are all spread out all over the country? The concept of like all of the families in that immediate area is largely gone now. So, and he's able to tell the future a little bit here to be like, I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's already sensing, especially with his family already moving out, that the world's becoming way too connected and transportation's becoming far easier for people to stay in one place. And for a lot of people in this generation, that was a really sad thought, that it just wouldn't be the way it was. You can't just like walk down the street, that you're like your son or daughter, especially with large families or a couple blocks down, and everyone's going to have an easy time getting together for the holidays kind of thing. It's a lot more difficult in that sense now. We have lost something there.
But well, and that is an excellent point, that was the norm, that families would stay together. And, and that this is when it does feel that families started moving apart. I think that this is turning around, where people want to be next to each other, and families are starting to like, you start seeing there's more people living closer together and staying closer to home. My family too, as well. Like my brother is in my hometown, but my sisters, we've all like spread out.
Yeah.
So we're not in Ohio anymore. My one sister's in Cincinnati, but that might as well be Kentucky. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
right.
It did. But I think maybe the trend,
it might reverse, because of a lack of a sense of community. And the other place where people can really see this is if you just want to like sort of experiment with this theory that like by the 1930s and 1940s people start to disperse, go into like your local cemetery of a town and look at when people were alive. So like people that have passed away 40s, 50s, there might be a couple family burial plots. But then if you look for like everybody that was born prior to 1920, the same last name for like 20 plots in a row, right? Because they didn't move. They're not buried elsewhere. You see these big family vaults, right? And some
mausoleums, yes. Mausoleum. Yeah, that like, it's huge, and that there's a ton of the family in there. Oh, that is incredibly interesting.
And you can probably bet that it's not just like, oh, well, they moved, and then when they were buried, the remains were sent back to be in the family plot. No, they probably stayed in the town for 200 years. So when you see these, and it's also, you can see it all around your town. That's a really good way to tell who was running things in the town and who was around the longest. You hear about the old town names. Like, oh, this is an old family of this town. Like where I'm in Bucks County, I hear certain names. I'm like, that's an old Bucks County name. But we see that less and less. So maybe we'll see a reversal, but that's a good experiment in your local community. Go into one of the older cemeteries, especially if it goes back now in the East Coast. Cemeteries can go back 1600s, 1700s, right? Maybe in the Midwest and in the West, you see it more starting the 1800s, but at least from like the 1800s to like 1910s, if you can find a cemetery that has been operating from like the early 1800s or so, check out who's the dominant name and how many people are there. It's not always just because there were a lot of kids at the time, right? A lot of it, you'll see like the dates, right? The generations, and be like, okay, these guys have stayed here. And if they're still in town, that's They're the lead families of those towns because they know everything about it. You can only imagine what they have in their attics and what letters they have in their collections telling your town's history. So it just hasn't probably been revealed yet in all cases. Anyway, it's an interesting subject. I love that Chester, he senses this. He can see what's coming. And I think it's largely because people are already starting to disperse.
Frank, I think I'll have to send you a questionnaire after all. I feel there is a lot you could tell us about Saipan, but you do not have my eyes and ears, and so I think that I will have to suggest the things to you that I would like to have you write about. I will see what I can do in the next few days in getting these questions assembled. Why don't you ask me some questions?
Oh, I've got questions.
I love this so much.
I've got so many questions. Chester, like, first of all, how dare you? No, just kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but like,
your descriptions are not apt enough.
Yeah, he's like, why don't you ask me some questions? So like,
yeah,
Dad,
you could
great.
really be more descriptive, okay? But you don't have my abilities to perceive, so I will have to prompt you better. So you do not have my eyes and ears. That's what he writes. You're insufficient to make the proper scientific observations about this. Okay.
Your letters have not told me the information I want to know. Now I must sit down and think of questions to ask you.
Tell me that your letters have been poor without actually telling me that your letters have been poor. Why don't you ask me something about where you grew up? It's very cold here, thank you. What is the temperature? 6 below. What does he need to ask? If I were Frank, I would respond to this with one thing. Did you finish those chairs yet for Mom? Mic drop. Why don't you finish a project, Dad? Oh well.
All right. I'm getting back there. Okay. Okay. I love Chester. Chester.
Yeah. And by the way, I did put on the website for especially our audio listeners, but we didn't have a picture of it on the screen. I think at the time, the mortar and pestle picture, Chester's mortar and pestle, is in the photo album, so you can see it there.
I got to see it. I got to hold it.
Yep.
That was really fun. Okay. All right. Moving on.
The draft quotas are being doubled, and a bill is being introduced in Congress drafting nurses. It is possible that there will be a manpower draft also. If not that, there will be a work or fight bill introduced that will probably be passed. It is amusing to note some of the little schemes that are cooked up by some of the young men around here to give them a complaint to keep out of the draft. This week, a young fellow came to me and requested to x-ray his stomach, as it was sore as a boil. He claimed that several years ago, a cow kicked him in the stomach, and I have never been all right since. I explained that all he had to do was tell it to the Army, and they would x-ray it for him. I did not see anything to base a just complaint on, and told him to wait. Love, Papa. Let us know about how bills are getting along. Do you think your position will hold you in your present place?
Yep. So, and then we hear about this
People
draft.
were already trying to get out of the draft.
Yeah, already trying to dodge. I mean, this is going to be tough because we've been talking about this in other episodes. Mm-hmm. We have that benefit of hindsight. They really think a land invasion of Japan is going to happen. That's what they're really trying to get out of, because Europe is going to be winding down, but the fight against Japan is big. And I looked it up, what was being referenced here. So Roosevelt gives his State of the Union address. He's still alive at this point. Harry Truman obviously getting more nervous day to day about the president's health, as was everybody. But on January 6th of 1945, Roosevelt gives his State of the Union, and what he was asking was that selective service, which is the act for the draft, be amended to allow for nurses to be brought into the military. And in the State of the Union, he said that the Army needed 60,000 nurses, but only had 42,000. And with voluntary recruiting, they've only been able to bring in 2,000 more. So they're short on nurses. So they're like, okay, we're going to draft the women in to work as nurses because we have this massive, massive need. And what it's probably based on is this land invasion of Japan. Now, Roosevelt's going to have knowledge of what's being worked on. But is it going to succeed, right? There's still testing and all of this other kind of stuff. I forget if the testing had already occurred at this point. I don't think it had. I think it was pretty quick after the testing that things were done. But yeah, so that's what they're worried about, and that's what Chester's bringing up. I didn't see if that bill had actually passed. I'll have to do some more research on that, because I don't recall hearing that selective service was ever amended to include women. It's clearly not today. So
Yeah.
Unless it was done in an emergency sense only for nurses at the time. But it definitely came up in his State of the Union address. So
Wow, that's so crazy.
Yeah.
But so there he let Francois know everything, and and let Francois know how disappointed he was in his letters that he's been writing.
Yes.
So
yeah, Frank needs to improve his letters for sure. For Chester at least. Yeah.
But then that was our second letter. So our third letter today is from Sweetie to her sister Jean.
Hutchinson, Kansas, January 19th, 1945. Dear Jean, we were glad to get your letter and know that we had not been consigned to the doghouse. I'm glad to have the sketch of Mom's dress, but with the shoulder design, I'm afraid the collar would be superfluous. However, I'm going to make it, and she can easily wear it on the gray dress she wore to our wedding. They sent us a pair of frames for our belated anniversary gift, along with a couple of pictures of Bob's family, one of the three of them, and one of K.M. alone. Don't you think she's changed a lot? Boy, I do. Lew is not too crazy about your passing his note along. To you he can let down his hair as he chooses, but before the others he is still a little reserved, and he was afraid they'd think him completely daft. I don't believe he really cares, but he just wasn't too crazy about the idea. Sounds as though you enjoyed yourself on your short visit, but you rascal you, is it fair to mislead them on the wages? Sure, if you can do it, hop to it. Drat it! Everybody's having a baby but me. Pat hasn't been married anyways near as long as I have. Lew's friends are having them right and left. Well, 2 couples are expecting them. Dorothy Hulsman's baby boy came at 6:33 a.m., January 1st. She named him D.C.
All right, let's pause here. So we're catching up with Sweetie. Sweetie is just going through answering probably some correspondence, some questions that Jean had. And then comes this line, which is the title of this episode. Sweetie's clearly seems to be trying for a baby at this point. And we had a previous letter where Laura had said, are you suggesting that we have a little, or she said, are you suggesting to her parents that we have a little graham cracker? So there is this very firm idea in her mind that she wants to have a baby. And now she's comparing herself to others, being like, what is the problem? I would like to have a baby. So
It's tough. It's tough. When I was trying for my first, everybody at work was pregnant. So I made them all stand around me. I was like, get all your pregnancy vibes around, and it worked. But yeah, she's looking around and she's seeing it all. There's all these young couples that are around them. Everybody's getting married because it's wartime. They're all having their babies. And here she is. And they've been together for a while.
Yep. They have.
And no baby.
Yep. They've been married for over a year. They had gotten together in August of 43. They were married December 3rd of 1943 back in Ottumwa. She thought he was going to be shipped out in Kansas. They've been in Kansas now for like 6 months.
Yeah.
So she's thinking, I think he's going to hang around. But I would like to remind everybody back to the prophecy, as I like to call it, from Mrs. Corey back at the wedding. She's going to get married. She's going to follow him wherever he goes. And Mrs. Corey, the one thing she was concerned about is, what if Sweetie gets pregnant and then he gets deployed? So let's all keep that in the back of our minds. And here she's tempting it, right? She's saying, now she's getting upset. Like, I would like to have a child. We're not going to get resolution on this in this letter. But you'll definitely want to listen to next week's episode.
Cigarettes are pretty hard to get. Lew buys 2 at a time, but his selection is poor. He's smoking Pall Mall, and they stink to high heaven. We didn't find out the doctor's diagnosis. They just refused to say. But Joe, in England, was trying to arrange a leave, and when they refused his request, they wrote this.
All right, let's pause this real quick, too, because we also have a geographic location update here, which is rare, right? Joe is Lew's brother. Joe's serving in the army. He's in England. So he's serving overseas at this point as well. We usually don't hear where Joe is because Joe is the unreliable narrator at times, being the actor. But at least we get the confirmation he is definitely overseas at this point.
Doctor advises father suffering hernia, diaphragm, malnutrition, and secondary anemia. Unable to undergo operation due to weakened condition. However, at present, shows signs of recovery. Officer's presence unnecessary. I don't know why they refused to tell what it was, unless they recognized Lew's mom for the Calamity Jane she is. We haven't heard from them for quite a few days, but the last we heard he was better and had gained enough weight to be able to keep his ring on.
So just a quick recap.
Yep.
That's why, pardon me.
Yep.
That's why Sweetie and Lew went to Philadelphia, was because Lew's father was not doing well.
Yeah.
And they were unsure about like what the problem was.
Yeah.
And so, but like Lew was able to get out there, thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And so a hernia in his diaphragm, he probably wasn't able to eat. We know that he was wearing a special device to probably help with that, to help keep the hernia in.
Mm-hmm.
And he was unable to undergo any kind of like, so this was, I mean, it's not a terribly, complex surgery. It's something that could be done. And then, obviously it's something that was done in this time, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't, he was not up to it. And that at last week's episode, when we read the card that Samuel had sent to Jean, and you could see that he obviously was in some pain when he wrote that out. So, but he's not at death's door.
No, not yet, at least. But there is a decline. There's certainly a decline, but enough so that they said to Joe, but they also mentioned the officer doesn't need to come over, so we get Joe's rank a little bit there. There's no need to fly to get back from England at this exact moment. And she's suspecting because of Sydney, because Sydney's lost the child before. She had lost Sammy Jr., that she probably is more anxious than she otherwise would be.
I wrote to Mom yesterday, sent her a letter from Mrs. Corey, and one from Bernice Davis's mother. I also told her I was sending her a couple of letters from Lucille Miller, along with a clipping about her wedding. But by the time I'd written a bulky letter and added 2 letters, the envelope was too full to put Lucille's in. So I'll send them to you, and you send them on to her. I asked her to send the others to you. Made and trade about. I'm trying so hard to catch up on the letters I owe, so please excuse me, so I can answer at least a few more. I'll try to write again soon, but you write to us, and tell us how much the dentist hurt you. Love, Lew, and Sweetie.
Yeah. Nice letter. Little things hinting at things in the future. We get the reminder that Lucille's married at this point. Also, it might seem strange to be like, why can't we fit extra letters into the thing? Because they're weighing the mail, as they're moving it back and forth. So I guess it probably got sent out at a later point. But yeah, January 1945, year is starting with a slightly different tone than 1944, for sure. Yeah. But that's it for this. I'm all out of coffee and we're out of letters. Look how that happened.
Oh, well, that worked out well. I got one more drink, and then I think that we can say goodbye until next week.
Yep. So thank you to everybody who's listening. Please like, share, and subscribe on the YouTube channel. If you're on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or one of the audio channels, please leave a review if you have the time to do it. We very much appreciate that. But until next week,